What, you want to say hi? I don't think you've met everybody. And this is Penny. She's made an appearance in some previous classes, but most of the time she's sitting next to me just being a very good girl, but she hasn't, I was gone for a few hours, so, you know. You want to say hi to everyone? Because I actually have to teach. They're not going to sit here and just watch you give me kisses for like the next hour. You want to say hi? Penny is our rescue pup. That's right. Did we rescue you? Yes, you rescued me too. Good girl. All right. Hello, everyone, and happy Wednesday. Hope your week's going well. What we're going to do today is, as I mentioned in the Monday lecture, and I apologize for my lighting. I'm filming this obviously at night. My selfie light is making me look very weird. I can't get, without any natural daylight, I'm either bright pink or bright orange. It's just not a good look. All right, well, we'll go for bright pink, apparently. Ugh. Okay, enough fooling with the lights. All right, so what are we doing today? So we need to go over, thank you for those of you, not everyone has done the disability etiquette quiz. I wanted to get a sense of what some people thought. And actually, this is what I'm going to base my lecture on today, is just kind of going through the quiz so that I can hit some of the talking points that I wanted to get across to all of you. Because I think some of this information, and it's not to criticize anyone, if you're, full disclaimer, as we're talking, if you use some of this terminology or some of this is new to you and you're like, oops, didn't know that, well, that's fine. I'm here to kind of give you the most current guidance of what is generally accepted in the disability community. And actually, I had put together a disability etiquette kind of PowerPoint and had done but I'm going to do this a little bit more informally for you guys. So first things first, I'm working on a midterm study guide. So next Monday's lecture is going to focus just for the 90% is just going to focus on that. I'm going to do like a refresh and because again, this course and this book has so much information. I feel like we need to do that. So the study guide will be sent to you and posted on Monday, or I might just email it to you. And I'm going to do Monday's lecture as kind of like, here's a reboot of some of the stuff that I really feel that you need to know. Some of it's going to be repetition. Some of it's going to be new information that I didn't get to the first time. So that's what next week is going to focus on, at least for Monday. And so for this week, we've already talked a little bit about healthcare. Now we're going to focus on my favorite topic, which is disability. And there's a lot of information in the book on disability. I'm glad that I hope you continue to read it. And there's a lot of information about specific types of disabilities, which is helpful information to know how different disabilities impact different people, because obviously if you understand how it impacts, it makes it easier for you to find solutions. And of course, you can also ask people too, which is part of the process as a social worker or working in a social work capacity. There is a PowerPoint deck for chapter 8 that again was developed by the authors, and they're in the Google Drive. There's a lot of really good information, but there's also some information that I personally don't necessarily agree with. So some of the terminology, for example, the authors, the most glaring one when I was reviewing it is that the authors refer to disability, saying that the preferred language is to say challenges instead of disability. And I have found that really truly is just not the case in the disability community. In and of itself, the word disability doesn't really have a meaning. So it's not a positive or a negative. It's kind of a neutral word, which is why most people prefer the word disability, because it just is. If you have a disability, then that's what you have. It's not some of the other language that is often used, like wheelchair bound, for example. That's a phrase that evokes a certain feeling about a person that is stuck or trapped in a wheelchair, as opposed to he has a disability. Why, yes, he does. There's no opinion about it or any underlying message. It's just a factual term. Challenges, I don't know. That doesn't resonate for me. And I know a lot of people that I work with, this is generally not the preferred language. However, that's what the authors go by. So some of what you'll hear is there's what's generally considered to be best practice language, and that's some of what I'm going to share with you today. But there's also different places or groups of people that have their own preferences, and that's perfectly fine. It's not one size fits all, and there are some people that do prefer certain language. So when in doubt, ask someone and they'll tell you what they prefer if you have the opportunity. So for this conversation, I figured I would jump off and start with, instead of doing the PowerPoint slides, which are very dense and kind of repetitive to some of the stuff that we've already talked about, I'm going to use the quiz as our conversation. So I'm seeing the quiz, you're not. And by the time you see this, you should have all already taken the quiz and have an idea how you did. Now, based on what I can see so far, for those of you who've already done it, some people did super, super great. Some people are kind of in the middle, and some people really struggled with the quiz. So I don't know. So again, it's not going to impact your final class grade, but if you did really poorly, listen up. So number one, the question was, if I see someone who uses a wheelchair struggling with an entrance to a building, it's okay to help them by holding the door open with my foot and helping push the wheelchair through. Now, it's not a trick question, but there's multiple parts to the question. And here's the part that you really know that makes this a false statement. If you answered true, you probably saw the part like, if I see someone struggling, it's okay to help. Well, of course, if you see someone that appears to be struggling, you could ask them if they need help. That would be the first step, instead of just jumping in and offering help. There's a couple of things. First and foremost, someone who's in a wheelchair, the wheelchair is kind of an extension of their body, or at least that's how they view it, how they see it. So if you push someone's wheelchair or just grab someone's wheelchair, that really is an invasion of their personal space. And they really don't like that. It's also very difficult because if you're in a wheelchair and someone starts to push you and that's not where you wanted to go, it's kind of the equivalent of someone grabbing your arms and dragging you somewhere where you didn't want to go. Like if I wanted to walk over there, I would. I don't need you to drag me. So the same thing with a wheelchair. You don't want to drag someone where they didn't intend to go. However, if you see someone in that situation, excuse me, my allergies have been really bad today. The other thing, before I say the last part, is that sometimes someone may appear to be struggling, but maybe they're not. So one example is someone who uses arm crutches or has any kind of balance issue. Sometimes when they're navigating things like doorways, they may lean their body weight on the door in order to get through it or do whatever. And people, while they have good intentions, if you go and you say, grab the doorway, and they're leaning on it so that they can, you may actually throw someone off balance or do something unintentionally. So I would say, even if someone appears to be struggling, the best thing to do is simply to go up to them and say, hey, can I hold the door for you? Or do you need any help? And if they say no, respect that. And if they say yes, then great, jump in and say, well, what do you need help with? Should you want me to hold the door? Should I push you through? And wait for them to, give you that guidance on what's okay for what they feel comfortable with. So number two, it is best not to ask a person with a service dog if they would mind if I pet their dog, since the dog is working to help that person. This is true. Service dogs are generally working. They go through extensive training to be sensitized to their environment so they can be alert and working for their handlers, their owners, what have you. If you intercede, even though you're asking politely, it still presents a rather awkward situation where the person needs to decline and tell you no and explain why. And that becomes very difficult to do over and over and over again. So if you see a dog that's working, respect that space and just let them keep working. There are generally times, if you are with a person who has a service animal and you see them frequently, sometimes they do give their animals breaks throughout the day, and there's always playtime for those dogs because they need rest time and playtime too. I have colleagues that have service animals, and they do indeed give them rest time and break time, and I have a pretty good idea now when that is, and when the dogs are not working and they're off the clock, then my colleagues are like, come on over, feel free to pet the dog, play with the dog, and whatever. And there's absolutely no problem with that whatsoever, as long as you know when that is, and you know when the animal is working and when they're not. But in general, if it's a stranger and someone you don't know and a strange dog and they're clearly working, then it's best not to even pose the question, because clearly they got work to do. Number 3 was, if someone has a speech impairment and it's hard to comprehend what she speaks, I should do my best job to guess what she's saying before I respond, rather than asking each time I'm unsure. I know sometimes it's very tempting, and as a person who is hard of hearing / deaf, I get this a lot because I don't always understand what's being said. And so I'll ask for clarification. And eventually, what do? We give up. And I will ask someone what, and they'll repeat it, and I'll say, I'm sorry, I still didn't hear you. Or I'll give them further guidance, like, I really need you to slow down and articulate, or maybe speak a little bit louder so I can understand you. And then this happens a lot when I'm like in a group of people where there's like a joke or something and I missed it, and I'll say, oh, what was that? I missed it. And they'll say, oh, never mind. And if that is one of the, it's like on my list of things that are the most frustrating about having a hearing loss, is that people who say like never mind or give up after I ask a time or two. And I know that it can be frustrating as the hearing person on the receiving end, but from the deaf perspective, when someone says never mind, it means that you're not worth my time to repeat what was said, or it's not worth my time to like clue you into what the joke was. And it feels very dismissive because it is. So same thing with someone who might have a speech difficulty, even if you don't understand them the first time, or say someone who has a stutter or something else, give them your time, allow them the time to convey what they want to say, give them the time to repeat if necessary, make them feel that, you want to hear what they have to say, and that what they're telling you is important to you. So even if they have to repeat it a couple of times so it could be clear, don't guess at what you think they might be saying. Say, I didn't get that. Could you repeat that for me? And if you're still not understanding it, you can ask them to maybe write it down or communicate in some other way, but don't give up on them. Number 4, when someone is hard of hearing or deaf, if I do not know sign language, I should avoid trying to communicate with them. Absolutely not. And I think everyone probably agrees on this point, given everyone's background here in the Deaf Studies program, is that no, but you'd be surprised how many people do feel that way. And they're like, well, I can't communicate with them if they're deaf. Well, sure you can. There's other ways to do it. And like the previous example, I think one of the best things that you can do in any situation that you're working in with someone who has any kind of disability is simply giving them your time, your patience, and allowing them to be heard. All right, number 5. When someone with communication difficulties has an interpreter with her, I should speak directly to the interpreter rather than to the person with whom I'm communicating. This is another one that I'm pretty sure everyone's going to get right just because of the nature of what we do. I had to throw in a couple of really easy ones. And of course, I think we all know that we are supposed to communicate with the person. Again, it's about that giving the person the respect and the dignity of the direct communication and not talking about them to the interpreter or whatever. But even though you know this fact, there will be plenty of times where you may be called to have to maybe educate someone else that you're working with who might be talking to the interpreter and not talking to the person who is deaf. And I would say, make the time to educate that person, consider it like kind of a learning teaching moment, and explain to them that the interpreter is just a conduit of communication and that you're really communicating with the individual. Number 6, most people in the disability community prefer the term differently abled. No, we don't. And I've actually seen this a lot more recently. I'm having a little bit of a soapbox moment, so come with me. There was a push there for a while for people to try and use softer language, different language, empowering language, like differently abled, to soften the blow of not using the word disability. But what happens when you're using a term like differently abled? Well, what you're really saying is that someone is not normal. And there's an undercurrent of kind of ableism to the whole thing. Now, for those of you who are not very familiar with ableism, that's something that you want to get very familiar with, but it's basically kind of having that bias or underlying preference towards able-bodied or people who do not have a disability. And excuse me, there are a lot of people who do demonstrate all types of different ableist attitudes or autist, like preferential for hearing, attitudes, and may not even know that they're doing it. So things like differently abled are kind of fall under the category of what is known as like inspiration porn, where I'm sure you've seen these memes where it shows a person who's just, really struggling, and the meme, the caption above it is like, your excuse is invalid or something like that. In other words, no matter how bad your day could be, at least you're not as bad off as this poor person who's in this wheelchair having to struggle through life. And the implication and the assumption is that disability is a struggle. It's a bad thing. It's not what you don't want to be in that category. Well, what if you are the person in the wheelchair? What if you are in that category? Being addressed as differently abled does anything but make you feel empowered. It has a connotation to it. And kind of like what I was saying a few minutes ago, I think generally speaking, most people in the community that I work with prefer labels that have no connotation at all. They're just factual, which is why we keep going back to just disability, because there's no assumption there. It's just a fact. Differently abled sounds like you're just trying way too hard, quite frankly. And it's kind of cringy, or as my daughter would say, mad cringy. All right, number 7. People with cognitive difficulties are not able to make responsible decisions and should be assigned a responsible adult to help them make choices. Well, for the purposes of the quiz, the answer is false. Why? Because this is not true in all cases. And we would never jump to assumptions that a person would not be able to make good, solid decisions on their own. And there's also a lot of cases where I've worked with clients that they could make some decisions on their own, and then others maybe they needed help with. So it's very rare that someone is not able to make any decisions on their own. For example, someone might be able to work. They can certainly make decisions on what they wear that day, and what activities they participate in. They can decide what they want for dinner. They can pick out things at the grocery store. They can do lots and lots of things. What maybe they might not be able to, maybe they might need some help with, their financial stuff, or going to the bank, or maybe they need help with, medical things, and they have someone to assist them with bigger decisions like that. But it's very rare that someone has, zero independence and is unable to make any decisions on their own. One of the things in the area of social work that is really important, and this is also part of the code of ethics, is always seeking for the highest level of dignity, respect, and independence that you can bring to your clients as possible. You are there to support and provide resources, and there will be times that you may need to step in and provide more of a helping hand and help with decision making, and they may lean on you more than a completely independent person would. But that doesn't mean that that's not still the goal. We always strive for our clients to be independent and successful and be able to do things on their own. So always go in with the attitude of focusing on your client's strengths, or your student's strengths, or whoever you're working with. Focus on what they can do and have a can-do attitude, and focus on independence. And trust me, that attitude will certainly be reflected from them, because they know that you believe in them and that you're trying to help them do the best that they can do. All right, number 8. It is okay to ask people with disabilities about their disabilities. Yes, absolutely. Of course, there's a right way and a wrong way to do it, but I think there's a lot of people that walk on eggshells, and they're afraid to just ask people because it could be awkward, and they're afraid of offending people and all kinds of stuff. But you know what? If you're just open and honest and direct, and you ask someone, you might learn something. I know so many people that would just rather people ask them about their disability than make assumptions about their disability. So, short story, this happened a few years back, but my daughter, who was kind of young at the time, I want to say she was probably like 8 or 9, we went into this like sandwich restaurant, and we had to wait a couple minutes for our food. And right next to us was a veteran who had lost his arm, and he had one of those hook things, and instead of like a full prosthesis, he had like the clasping hook. And my daughter naturally was very curious, and I didn't prompt her. I didn't say, in fact, she picked up on it before I did. And my daughter, being the precocious one that she is, walked right over to the table, and she was like, "Hi, I'm Riley." And he was like, "Hi, I'm Bill," or whatever, I forget what his name was. And she's looking at his arm, and she goes, "Did you lose your arm?" And he said, "Yes, I did." And she said, she could tell she was thinking for a second. And then she said, "I would like to know more about that. But first, can I shake your hand, or can I fist bump you?" Or like, she like asked him, like, "How would you like to?" And he like looked over at me, he goes, "Is this your daughter?" I'm like, "Yes." And I'm like, as a mom, you're like quick to, like, "I'm sorry." And he was like, "No, not at all." And we ended up moving over and chatting with him for a few. And he was like, "Most people just stare at me, and they don't want to ask. It's awkward. It's weird." And he's like, people don't want to even talk to me, or much less try to shake my hand or something like that, because they really don't know what to do. So they just avoid him. And, it was very refreshing for her to just be like, "Hi, what do you prefer? And tell me more about it if you want to tell me." And he did, and he thought it was really cool. So, and I find that to be a case with a lot of my colleagues. I have colleagues that are blind, and obviously I am sighted, so I don't have the same perspective that they do. And I ask questions all the time, probably too many, but I like to know more about it, and I would like to know their perspective. And I have learned so much just by talking with people and listening to their experiences. And if there's one thing that you can get really good at. It's just being a good active listener and really listening to the people that you work with. You will learn so much from them. Number 9, it is acceptable to refer to someone who has epilepsy as an epileptic. So one of the things that the textbook also talks about is what's called person first language. And as I mentioned when we started this whole conversation, there will be exceptions to the rule about what types of language are acceptable and what types of language people prefer. But generally speaking, best practice is to use person first language. Now, what's person first language? Well, exactly how it sounds. It means that when you're referring to someone who has a disability, you put the person first. So it's a person with a disability. I'm an individual who is deaf, or a man with epilepsy. So he's a person first, and then the label or the disability, as opposed to the deaf woman or the epileptic man, because that's putting the disability first. And it's not. I'm a person before I'm anything else. However, there are newer groups, I will say, that kind of like Deaf Pride. They very much enjoy their disability label. They're not ashamed of it. And they do prefer disability first language because they feel like it's part of their identity, and they're fine with that. In fact, they prefer it. So there are some people who do say that, but more often than not, best practice, if you're unsure, is to always do person first language, because you're always honoring the person first, and then whatever their label is comes after that. It's not the entirety of their identity and who they are. And then number 10, people who are blind have an enhanced sense of hearing. So once you've met them, you do not need to mention your name again. They will remember your voice and will find it insulting if you keep saying what your name is. Absolutely false. So one, it is always good to identify yourself to a person who is blind. I will say that colleagues of mine who are blind know my voice because they hear it all the time, so I don't have to keep saying it. However, I have one colleague that works in our department, and when I'm saying hello, or I'm seeing her in a different environment, I sometimes will remind her who I am because she's not expecting to hear my voice. And I'll say, oh, hey, Kate, it's Dorian. Like if I see her in the subway or something, she's not expecting to hear my voice. So I'll say, hey, Kate, it's Dorian, just to make sure that she knows that it's me. Because otherwise I would be like, hey, Kate, and she'd be like, Dorian. And, she's like kind of going through this auditory catalog of like all the voices that she knows. And I would rather she not have to do that. So I just tell her that who I am. And I have several blind colleagues. I always announce who I am, and verbally say like, hey, it's me, I'm over here, or whatever, to let them know, and I always say goodbye when I'm leaving. So and I've left the conversation, what have you. So, after a while, again, you can follow their lead, and you can even ask that question and say, do you find that helpful? And they'll say, no, I know your voice now. When Kate first started, she didn't know any of our voices in the department. So she asked that all of us, especially in Zoom meetings, say our names, at the beginning of the meeting, until she got to know all of our voices. And now we don't do that in the Zoom meeting. She knows who everybody is. So absolutely best practice is to say who you are. In some spaces, it's even a good idea, if you're working with deaf or deafblind, to give a brief description. Some people prefer that. Some people not so much. So like I said, I have one colleague, she doesn't really care much for doing the descriptions, so we don't. But sometimes in a Zoom meeting, I will give a brief description of myself in addition to saying my name, just so that people who might be on the call that do not have vision have kind of an idea of who I am and what I look like. Some people prefer to have some kind of a verbal description. And it's just a nice thing to do for everyone to feel included. So those are the 10 questions that I gave you on the quiz. And it's also kind of a very brief overview of kind of disability etiquette. So some of these will show up on the midterm, because I think this is a really great starting point for wherever you end up going in the future. And as a professional, is just being able to make people feel comfortable and welcome and not make assumptions about either their disability or their ability, and to be able to properly help them, keeping an open mind, listening to what they describe their barriers are, and just taking the time to be a really good active listener. So if you can do all of those things, then you already are off to a great start in your profession. So that's that for Wednesday. And I think I've probably given you all the content, or most of the important content, for chapter 7 and chapter 8 for this week, and as well as you're working on this week's assignment of accessibility and locating some different things. Again, I want you to be creative. So I hope you find some pretty good barriers out there and find something that maybe I haven't even noticed before either, or problems that should be solved that haven't been addressed yet. So if there's any work that you still need to get caught up on, please do that ASAP. And if you have any problems, I've noticed there is some stuff missing in the grade book. Most of you are doing great, but there's still a few that are behind. So let me know if you need help before you get too far behind and then we're not able to do anything about it. You know how to reach me, and I will see you all on Monday, and we'll start going over the midterm. Take care. Bye.